$2 million defense contract sounds like when it dies? It doesn't explode like you'd expect. It just goes quiet, real quiet. I was sitting in my pickup truck outside Apex Manufacturing at 11:30 on a Wednesday morning in April, watching through my laptop as 20 years of precision tooling work locked itself down in front of a room full of Pentagon brass. The production line stopped dead, every CNC machine went dark, and Preston Zhao's career imploded in real time. The best part? He had no idea I was watching from the parking lot, or that I'd triggered the whole shutdown from my truck 8 blocks away. But let me back up to 7:45 that morning when Preston fired me for refusing to hand over American manufacturing secrets to some outfit in Mexico. That's when this whole thing started, though honestly, I'd been planning for this day since I set up my little insurance policy 4 years ago. My name's Harold Armstrong. Most folks call me Hank. I'm 58 years old, widowed 3 years back when my wife Carol lost her battle with cancer. Got 2 grown kids, my son Brian, who's 25, just finished his second tour with the Marines, and my daughter Linda, who's 23, studying engineering at State. Then there's my grandson Tommy, Brian's boy, who's 8 years old and thinks I hung the moon. That kid is the reason I get up every morning and the reason I wasn't going to let some corporate suit sell out American manufacturing to the lowest bidder. Before all this went down, I was chief manufacturing engineer at Apex Manufacturing Systems. 20 years Navy before that, working on everything from submarine components to aircraft carrier systems. You learn a thing or two about precision when lives depend on your work. After I got out, I spent 12 years building the most precise tooling systems the defense industry had ever seen. We weren't just making parts, we were making the machines that made the parts that kept our F-35s flying and our drones operational. When you're building components for aircraft that protect American pilots, there's no such thing as close enough. Apex started small. Just me and 4 other Navy guys in a converted warehouse working 16-hour days to prove that American manufacturing could still compete with anyone in the world. We had contracts with Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, companies that understood the difference between cheap parts and reliable parts. That was back when Preston was still a junior engineer, eager to learn about real manufacturing from guys who'd actually built things with their own hands. I trained Preston myself 15 years ago when he was fresh out of engineering school at Stanford. Kid was smart, I'll give him that, but book smart. Had all the theory but none of the practical knowledge that comes from watching a $2 million CNC machine turn a piece of titanium into a component that would spend the next 20 years keeping pilots alive. He was hungry to learn back then, asking good questions, staying late to understand why we did things certain ways. Somewhere along the line, though, Preston traded his engineering judgment for business school thinking, started talking about global supply chains and cost optimization instead of quality and reliability. When the board made him CEO 3 years ago, right around the time Carol was getting sicker, I should have seen the writing on the wall. The changes started small. New efficiency reports every month. Consultants coming through asking why we couldn't make components faster, cheaper, with fewer people. Preston started scheduling meetings with investment groups from Hong Kong and Shanghai, talking about strategic partnerships and technology transfer opportunities. Every conversation seemed to end with someone asking why American labor costs were so high compared to overseas alternatives. That's when I started preparing my exit strategy. Not because I wanted to leave, Apex was my life's work, but because I could see where things were heading. Carol and I had learned the hard way during her cancer treatment that you better have a backup plan when the people in charge stop caring about what's right and start caring only about what's profitable. I set up Armstrong Precision Technologies, LLC in 2019, right after Carol's diagnosis when the medical bills started piling up. My daughter Linda was the primary stakeholder, and every critical patent, every precision tolerance specification, every piece of core manufacturing knowledge that made our F-35 components actually work. All of it was filed under that LLC, not Apex. Perfectly legal, perfectly planned, and about to become Preston's worst nightmare. The thing about building precision manufacturing systems is that you can't just hand them off to anyone. Every tolerance measurement, every quality control protocol, every safety specification exists for a reason. One deviation of a few thousandths of an inch on a wing component and some 22-year-old pilot from Ohio doesn't come home to his family. I'd spent 12 years perfecting those systems, working with metallurgists and aeronautical engineers who understood that good enough wasn't good enough when lives were on the line. Preston seemed to think manufacturing knowledge was something you could transfer with a PowerPoint presentation and a training manual. That's not how it works. Real manufacturing expertise comes from years of experience, from understanding how materials behave under stress, from knowing the difference between a component that will last 20 years and one that will fail after 6 months. So when Preston called that meeting on Wednesday morning, I knew what was coming. The signs had been there for months. The visits from Mexican manufacturing consultants, the board presentations about operational efficiency, the way Preston avoided eye contact when he talked about our evolving business model. I walked into his corner office at 7:30 a.m. thinking maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Maybe Preston wanted to discuss the new Pentagon contract expansion we'd been working toward for 8 months. Maybe he wanted to talk about adding capacity for the next generation fighter components. Instead, I found him pacing behind his glass desk like a caged animal, sweating through his $3,000 suit even though the air conditioning was running full blast. "Hank, sit down," he said. "No coffee this time, no small talk about the weather or my grandson's Little League team, just straight to business." That should have been my first warning sign. "We need to discuss operational efficiency," Preston began, using that corporate speak I'd learned to hate over the past few years. In the military, when someone starts talking about operational efficiency, it usually means some Pentagon desk jockey wants to replace experienced personnel with cheaper alternatives. Same principle applies in the civilian world. "The board's been reviewing our cost structure," Preston continued. "We've identified significant savings opportunities in our manufacturing operations." I could feel the room getting colder, and it had nothing to do with the air conditioning. That's when Preston dropped the bomb that I'd been dreading for months. "We're partnering with manufacturer Gonzalez in Tijuana," he said, like he was announcing a new coffee machine for the break room. "They can handle our precision tooling operations at 40% of current costs. You'll be leading the knowledge transfer initiative, training their team leads on our F-35 component specifications." I looked at this kid, and Preston was still a kid to me, even at 42. I'd taught him everything he knew about real manufacturing when he was eager to learn from guys who'd actually built things. Now he was asking me to gift wrap American defense secrets and ship them south of the border like we were talking about assembling cell phone cases. "You want me to train Mexican contractors on classified manufacturing processes?" I asked, keeping my voice level. 20 years in the Navy teaches you to stay calm when the situation's about to go sideways. "It's the global marketplace, Hank. The board expects us to remain competitive. These aren't classified processes, they're manufacturing specifications, right? Manufacturing specs for components that go into $80 million fighter jets. Specifications that took me 12 years to perfect, working with metallurgists and engineers who understood that when you're building parts for aircraft that protect American pilots, precision isn't negotiable." "Preston," I said, leaning forward in my chair, "these aren't smartphone accessories we're talking about. One tolerance failure on a wing component and some 23-year-old pilot from Kansas doesn't make it home to his wife and kids." His face went hard. Same expression I'd seen on junior officers who'd forgotten that leadership means taking responsibility instead of passing blame down the chain of command. "This isn't a request, Hank. The transition begins Monday. Gonzalez's team arrives Thursday for knowledge transfer. I need you to prepare comprehensive training materials by Friday." The room went quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of CNC machines running on the factory floor below. Machines that I'd programmed, calibrated, and maintained for over a decade. Machines that were about to become worthless in the wrong hands. I'd spent enough years in the military to recognize when someone was giving you an order they knew was wrong, the kind of order that gets good people killed because some officer cared more about his efficiency report than protecting his troops. "I can't do that, Preston." The words hung in the air like smoke from a backfiring engine. Everything changed in that moment. I could see it in Preston's eyes, the exact second when he stopped seeing me as his former mentor and started seeing me as an obstacle to be removed. "Can't or won't." His voice carried that dangerous edge that officers get when their carefully planned operation starts falling apart. "Won't," I said clearly. "Those manufacturing processes protect American pilots flying American aircraft built with American expertise. They're not training materials for foreign contractors looking to underbid us next quarter." Preston reached for his desk phone without breaking eye contact. "Security to my office, please. Immediately." "Harold Armstrong," he said, his voice cold as a January morning in Detroit. Your refusal to adapt to our evolving business model shows you're no longer aligned with company objectives. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. 15 minutes to pack up 12 years of my professional life. The whole corporate termination routine. But here's what Preston didn't know. I'd been preparing for this exact scenario since 2019, right after Carol's diagnosis, when I realized that the people running Apex cared more about quarterly reports than long-term stability. Eddie Torres arrived at my office 5 minutes later, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Good man, Navy veteran like myself, served 2 tours in the Persian Gulf. He knew this whole situation was wrong, but he had a job to do. Sorry about this, Hank, Eddie said quietly as we walked down the hallway past the engineering offices where my team was pretending to work while trying to figure out what the hell was happening. Not your fault, Eddie, you're just following orders. I patted him on the shoulder. But you might want to start updating your resume. Things are about to get very interesting around here. In the elevator, I filled him in on what Preston had planned. They're selling us out, Eddie. Moving production to Mexico, then licensing our technology to whoever writes the biggest check. Preston's got meetings with Chinese investors scheduled for next month. Eddie's jaw tightened. He'd lost 2 buddies to equipment failures caused by cheap foreign manufactured parts during his deployment. That's not right, Hank. These systems keep people alive. Exactly. Which is why I made sure to protect them. My office looked exactly the same as it had 3 hours earlier when I was a respected chief engineer instead of an escorted security risk. Pictures of Tommy at his Little League games lined my desk, him sliding into home plate at last month's championship game, getting his MVP trophy, both of us at Rangers Stadium last summer. There was my old ship photo from the USS Nevada, the original Apex development team working 16-hour days in that converted warehouse, and my coffee mug that Tommy had made me in art class. World's Best Grandpa painted in crooked blue letters. 15 minutes to pack up my professional life. I grabbed the personal stuff first. Photos, the mug, that small American flag Tommy had colored for Veterans Day. But what I really needed was already in my jacket pocket. A USB drive that looked like any other storage device but contained something. Preston had never bothered to investigate. That drive held the original patent filings, the LLC licensing agreements, and most importantly, the administrative codes for what I called the Armstrong Protocols, built right into every CNC machine, every quality control system, every piece of precision equipment that made Apex's manufacturing possible, my insurance policy. As Eddie and I walked toward the elevator, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my core manufacturing team. Storm coming. Watch the 11:30 demo real careful. Things about to get interesting. Kelly Rodriguez, my lead programmer and probably the smartest manufacturing engineer I'd ever worked with, texted back immediately. What did you do, Hank? Nothing yet, I typed back. But they're about to find out what happens when you mess with someone who spent 20 years protecting American defense systems. My F-150 had never felt more like a mobile command center. I fired up my laptop right there in the Apex parking garage and logged into the manufacturing control interface. Not through the company network, but through the back channels I'd built into every system over the past 4 years. The screen came to life with a simple message. Welcome, Chief Engineer. All systems operational. Armstrong Protocols armed and ready. The Armstrong Protocols. While Preston and his board had been celebrating each new contract I'd delivered, I'd been quietly building something they didn't even know existed. A dead man's switch wired directly into every piece of precision equipment in that facility. The logic was elegant in its simplicity. If the chief engineer's employment status changed to terminated without proper knowledge transfer protocols, meaning a formal handover to another qualified American engineer with appropriate security clearance, every machine would automatically enter protective shutdown mode. No production, no demonstrations, no $150 million contracts until the ownership dispute got resolved through proper legal channels. I checked my watch. 9:15 a.m. Preston's big Pentagon demonstration was scheduled for 11:30 sharp. He'd have a conference room full of generals and defense contractors watching him show off technology he thought belonged to him. Time to teach him the difference between licensing something and owning it. I activated the protocols with a single keystroke. Every piece of equipment in that facility began its countdown. 2 hours, 15 minutes, 0 seconds, and ticking down steadily. 135 minutes until Preston's world came apart at the seams. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. Kid was on his morning recess break between classes. Grandpa, Mom said there's weird stuff about your company on social media. Everything okay? I smiled as I typed back, Everything's better than okay, buddy. Your old grandpa just reminded some folks why they shouldn't mess with people who actually know how to build things. That's so cool. Can't wait to hear the story. Got to get back to math class. Love you. Love you too, kiddo. That kid. 8 years old, straight A student, and smart enough to probably run circles around half the executives at Apex. I was doing this as much for his future as anything else. Tommy was growing up in a world where his grandfather's work might be all that stood between his generation and foreign governments trying to steal our technological advantages. I drove across town to Margaret Wells' law office. Margaret had handled the Armstrong Precision Technologies paperwork 4 years ago when Carol was getting sicker, and we needed to protect our intellectual property. She'd been waiting for this phone call ever since, knowing that sooner or later corporate greed would collide with my principles. "Hank," she said as her assistant showed me into her corner office overlooking the downtown business district, "I heard about your employment status change. Ready to discuss your options?" Through her windows, I could see the Apex building, 12 blocks away. Up on the 15th floor, Preston was probably making final preparations for his demo, completely unaware that in exactly 1 hour and 23 minutes, his manufacturing empire was going to shut down like a diesel engine with contaminated fuel. "Let's talk about what happens when that countdown hits 0, I said, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. Margaret pulled out a thick folder that had been waiting in her filing cabinet for 4 years. Armstrong Precision Technologies, LLC, owns every critical patent, every manufacturing process, and every quality control specification that makes Apex's defense contracts possible. They've been operating under license agreements that expire the moment your employment terminates improperly." She spread the documents across her desk like she was dealing cards. Patent filings from 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022, all properly registered with your daughter Linda as primary stakeholder. Apex has been licensing technology they never actually owned. What about their counter-arguments? They'll claim I developed everything on company time. "Already covered," Margaret said with the confidence of someone who'd spent 25 years in intellectual property law. "The original development contracts you signed included provisions for personal consulting work and independent research. Every innovation you filed was done during off hours using your own resources. Completely legal." She leaned back in her chair. "The question isn't whether you own the technology, Hank. The question is what you want to do with that ownership." This was the moment I'd been preparing for since I'd walked out of that building with Eddie at my side. The moment when 12 years of careful planning would either pay off or fall apart. "I want to build the company Apex should have been," I said. "American-owned, veteran-operated, focused on protecting our pilots instead of selling our expertise to whoever writes the biggest check." My phone rang. Brian, calling from his apartment across town where he lived with his wife Lisa and Tommy. "Dad, I just got a call from Lisa. She saw something on the news about Apex. What's going on?" "Your old man just had a career change, son. Nothing to worry about." "Career change? Dad, you've been at that company for 12 years. What happened?" I filled him in on the morning's events. Preston's outsourcing plan, the firing, the protocols I'd just activated. Brian listened without interrupting, military discipline kicking in. "So you're telling me they fired you for refusing to hand over defense manufacturing secrets to foreign contractors? That's about the size of it." There was a long pause. "Dad, that's not a career change. That's a declaration of war." "Sometimes war's what it takes to protect what matters, Brian. Your grandfather understood that in World War II. You understood it in Afghanistan. Now it's my turn. What do you need from me?" That was my boy. Military training never really leaves you. When the mission gets complicated, you don't waste time complaining. You ask what needs to be done. Right now, just take care of your family. But there might be some opportunities coming up for a former Marine who understands precision manufacturing. "Roger that, Dad. Keep me posted." I hung up and checked my watch. 10:45 a.m. 45 minutes until Preston's demonstration began. Somewhere in that Apex conference room, they were probably running final system checks, making sure all the screens were working, preparing to impress a room full of Pentagon brass with technology they thought they controlled. Margaret had been watching me during the phone call. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? Bring down the whole company?" "I'm not bringing down anything," I said. "I'm protecting American manufacturing from people who want to sell it to the highest bidder. There's a difference." She smiled, the kind of smile that told me she'd been hoping for this day almost as much as I had. In that case, let's talk about what happens next. We spent the next 30 minutes reviewing the legal framework that would kick in the moment Apex's systems went dark. Margaret had prepared everything. Injunction papers to prevent any attempt at system access without proper authorization, licensing agreements for legitimate defense contractors who wanted to work with American-owned technology, and incorporation documents for the expanded Armstrong Precision Technologies. One more thing, Margaret said as we wrapped up. I've been in touch with some people who might be very interested in acquiring legitimate access to your manufacturing processes. American companies, veteran-owned businesses, defense contractors who understand the difference between cost-cutting and corner-cutting. Anyone I'd know? William Hayes at Coastal Defense Partners. Retired Navy Admiral, runs the most respected precision manufacturing operation on the East Coast. He's been looking for exactly the kind of expertise you've developed. I'd heard of Hayes. Good reputation, solid contracts, the kind of man who understood that when you're building components for military aircraft, quality isn't optional. Set up a meeting, I said, but not until after this afternoon's entertainment. Margaret checked her own watch. Speaking of which, shouldn't that demonstration be starting soon? 15 minutes, I said, standing up to shake her hand. Just enough time for me to find a good parking spot where I can watch the fireworks. Back in my truck, I pulled up the Apex manufacturing interface on my laptop. The countdown was running perfectly. 0 hours, 14 minutes, 33 seconds. 14.5 minutes until every CNC machine, every quality control station, every piece of precision equipment in that facility would lock down tighter than Fort Knox. I thought about Preston up there in his conference room, probably adjusting his tie and running through his presentation one last time. He'd spent the morning thinking he was preparing to secure the biggest contract in Apex's history. Instead, he was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his corporate career. The thing about revenge is that it's only satisfying if the other guy understands exactly what's happening and why. Preston was about to get a masterclass in the difference between owning technology and licensing it. At exactly 11:30 a.m., the Apex conference room had been transformed into what looked like a military command center. 2 massive screens displayed our manufacturing interface in high-definition glory, while the company's remaining engineers stood ready at monitoring stations. The Pentagon evaluation team sat around the polished conference table. 3 generals, 4 defense contractors, and enough combined authority to approve or kill contracts worth more than most small countries' entire defense budgets. Preston stood at the head of the table, confident as a poker player holding 4 aces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his practiced presentation voice echoing off the conference room walls. "What you're about to see isn't just precision manufacturing. It's the future of American defense production, streamlined for global competitiveness." I had a perfect view of the whole thing through my laptop's remote access to the conference room security cameras. Preston had no idea that the very technology he was about to demonstrate was counting down to 0 like a digital time bomb. He nodded to the demonstration engineer, some kid fresh out of MIT who'd been hired to replace my assistant after I'd recommended him for a promotion 6 months earlier. The kid started typing commands, and the screens flickered to life with our manufacturing initialization sequence. Everything looked perfect for exactly 47 seconds. Then the first error message appeared in bold red letters. "Chief Engineer Authentication Required." The MIT kid frowned, typing faster. "Just a minor authentication glitch, sir. Let me reset the connection." But the system wasn't having it. "Access denied. Employment verification failed. What's the problem?" Preston's voice carried that edge that officers get when their carefully planned operation starts falling apart in real time. "I'm not sure, sir. The system is requesting engineer-level credentials that don't seem to exist in our current database." The screens flashed red. A bigger message appeared. "Armstrong protocols activated. Production shutdown initiated. Time remaining. 0 hours, 0 minutes, 15 seconds. Contact system administrator for resolution." I watched Preston's face go white as the countdown hit 0. Every screen went dark simultaneously, followed by the distant sound of CNC machines powering down throughout the facility. $20 million worth of precision manufacturing equipment had just entered protective lockdown mode. The Pentagon team exchanged those looks that senior military officers perfect over decades of dealing with contractors who overpromise and underdeliver. General Patricia Martinez, who'd been evaluating defense systems since before Preston got out of engineering school, leaned forward with the expression of someone who'd just watched a $1 million missile miss its target by 5 miles. "Mr. Zhao," she said in that steel-trap voice that had probably terrified junior officers for the past 25 years, "is there a problem with your manufacturing systems?" "No problem at all, General Martinez. Just a routine security protocol that will be resolved momentarily." Preston turned to Glenn Morrison, the guy they'd promoted to head of manufacturing about 30 seconds after my termination went through. "Fix this now." Glenn's fingers flew across his keyboard, sweat beading on his forehead like he was trying to defuse an actual explosive device. "Sir, I can't access the core manufacturing controls. There's something here about Armstrong protocols, but I've never seen that system before." Armstrong protocols. What the hell? Were Armstrong protocols? Nobody in that room knew the answer, which was exactly the point. I'd built those safeguards so deep into the system architecture that you'd need my personal authorization codes just to understand what had happened, let alone fix it. "Get Harold Armstrong on the phone," Preston barked at his assistant. "Sir, he was terminated this morning per your direct orders." "I don't care if he was terminated. Get him on the line now." The call went straight to my voicemail, the professional recording I'd set up specifically for this moment. "You've reached Harold Armstrong. I'm currently unavailable, but if this is regarding manufacturing system architecture, please consult your existing licensing agreements and employment contracts. Have a great day." General Martinez stood up slowly, gathering her materials with the deliberate movements of someone who'd just wasted 4 hours of valuable time. "Mr. Zhao, it appears you have significant operational issues that require immediate resolution. We'll need to postpone this demonstration indefinitely." "Wait, please, General, this is just a minor technical issue that we can resolve within the hour." "Minor?" The General's voice could have frozen liquid nitrogen. "Your core manufacturing systems are completely inaccessible during a $150 million contract evaluation, and apparently the only person who can fix this crisis is someone you fired 4 hours ago." She headed for the door, her team following in formation like a well-disciplined unit retreating from a compromised position. "We'll be in touch when you have your house in order." The Pentagon team filed out in crisp military precision, leaving behind a conference room that felt like a morgue. Through my laptop screen, I could see Preston standing there like he'd just watched his entire career implode in real time. Then a single message appeared on both dark screens. "Manufacturing systems in protective mode. All access revoked. For licensing inquiries, please. Contact Armstrong Precision Technologies, LLC." In the span of 4 hours, Preston Zhao had lost everything. The Pentagon contract was dead. Apex stock price went into freefall as news of the failed demonstration spread through defense industry circles like wildfire. And every piece of precision manufacturing technology that justified the company's entire valuation was locked behind digital walls that only I controlled. My phone started ringing immediately. First Preston, then the board members, then what sounded like every lawyer in the city. I let them all go to voicemail. 2 hours later, I found myself in the executive offices of Coastal Defense Partners, sitting across from Admiral William Hayes in a conference room that overlooked the harbor. William was the kind of man who'd been making defense deals since before the internet existed, and he had the reputation to prove it. "Armstrong," he said, studying me over his coffee cup, "I've had a very interesting afternoon, General. Martinez called me personally after the Apex demonstration. In 30 years of defense contracting, she said she's never witnessed such a spectacular system failure." He slid a tablet across the table. The screen displayed the original Armstrong Precision Technologies Incorporation documents. Our legal team discovered that every critical patent, every precision manufacturing process that makes Apex valuable, it all traces back to your LLC. Apex has been licensing technology they never actually owned. They had full usage rights, I said carefully, as long as certain employment conditions were maintained. Conditions that were violated this morning. His smile was sharp as a machinist's blade. "So tell me, Hank, what exactly do you want?" This was the moment I'd been preparing for since I'd walked out of that building with Eddie at my side. I want to build the company Apex should have been. American-owned, veteran-operated, focused on protecting our pilots instead of selling our expertise to whoever writes the biggest check. We spent the next 3 hours working through details with William's legal team. By 5 p.m., the framework was complete. Armstrong Precision Technologies would expand into a full manufacturing operation with $300 million in backing from Coastal Defense Partners. The patents would transfer cleanly, my core team from Apex could join me, and Preston Zhao would wake up tomorrow to discover his company was worth about as much as a rusted-out pickup truck. That evening, I was grilling burgers for my family. Brian, Lisa, Tommy, and Linda all gathered on my back deck for our usual Wednesday dinner. "Grandpa," Tommy said, still wearing his Little League uniform from practice, "Dad says you started your own company today." I looked at this kid, 8 years old, growing up in a world where his grandfather's work might be all that stood between his future and foreign governments trying to steal our technological advantages. "That's right, buddy," your old grandpa decided. "It was time to build something that actually matters for your generation." "Is that good for us?" "Yeah, son, that's very good for our family." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my back porch thinking about Carol and what she would have said about all this. She'd always told me that sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it's difficult, especially when it protects the people you love. Preston thought he could replace experience with cheap labor and American engineering with foreign contractors willing to work for less. He learned the hard way that when you try to screw over someone who spent 20 years protecting American interests, you better make sure they don't hold all the keys to everything you need to survive. They fired me at 7:45 a.m. for refusing to compromise American manufacturing. By 5 p.m. the same day, I controlled the very technology their entire company was built on. Because in America, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's building something better and proving that experience, integrity, and expertise will always beat cost-cutting and corporate greed. In the end, I learned that the most dangerous thing you can do to a man who's spent decades protecting American interests is underestimate his willingness to sacrifice comfort for principle. Because guys like me don't just build systems to work today, we build them to protect the people we love tomorrow. Preston discovered too late that when you're dealing with someone who values legacy over salary, loyalty over stock options, and American expertise over foreign profit margins, you're not negotiating with an employee. You're challenging a patriot who's already planned for every move you think you're smart enough to make.